Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. So just moments ago in the show, I mentioned the new normal, a global economy, a worldwide disruption that has shaken up the economy and society like a 7.6 scale on the Richter scale. The idea that we are returning to normal or establish a new normal, I know our next guest says, is preposterous. We've undergone a profound change in normal, and that makes it inconceivable that a new normal can superimpose itself on our society. And that's why I am thrilled to be joined by Weiss, a consultant, speaker, and author. Through his consulting firm, Summit Consulting Group, he's worked with more than 500, that's right, 500 leading organizations, including some very big names, including the Federal Reserve, New York Times, and has published 60 books, many of which are on the curricula at top business schools. His newest book, Sentient Strategy, How to Create Market-Dominating Strategies in Turbulent Economies, just came out in March, and you can learn more at alanweiss.com. Dr. Alan Weiss, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So that's quite an impressive background. So you've seen a thing or two over your decades in business. Have you ever seen anything like the times that we're in right now? And why are you steering away from terms of new normal? You've seen it all.
Well, I have seen times like this, and the fact is that there is no new normal. There's no return to normal. I have trademarked the term no normal, and we have to get used to this kind of constant change. This is the world we live in now. And besides, normal means typical or average, and I don't think we want to return to typical or average or create typical and average. So we've learned a lot from the pandemic. We've learned a lot from financial crises. We've learned a lot from the geopolitical messes around the world. And it's time we took advantage of it and not run from it.
Absolutely. And that's great that you've taken that really stable approach to this process. And I think a lot of folks have really been shaken up, and they start using a term like strategic planning, making sure that we can overcome the next pandemic and, again, live in this new normal. But you write in the book that strategic planning is really an oxymoron. Explain what you mean, Alan.
Planning kills strategy, because planning is bottom up. You start at the bottom, what's your quota for next year, what's your expectation for next year. By the time it gets to executives, their hands are tied. Strategy, however, is top down. And so strategy creates a picture of the future. It's a what. It's what you want to become. And you don't deal with tactics. You don't deal with how. That prohibits companies from growing and changing. You start with that picture of the future. That's a very important distinction. And in my strategy work, I have found that companies and executives and board members tend to default to the how. They default to tactics because there's more immediate gratification. So we have to discipline ourselves to truly look at the future. And Sentient Strategy does that for about a year. Looking forward for 5 years or 10 years and spending months setting strategy, that is an exercise in futility.
Absolutely. So what length of time should a business strategy encompass when you sort of go away from that term strategic planning, a business strategy? What period of time should we be looking at?
What I have found in my experience is that right now, in this day and age, 12 to 15, 12 to 18 months, something there. But in addition, you have to use the strategy as an organic document. And so it has to guide the decisions that set the nature and direction of the business on a daily basis. So, you never hear somebody saying, congratulations, you had a great quarter. However, you didn't make much progress to our strategic goals, and that's not good. They just congratulate people on the quarter. Sentient strategy is a different way of looking at that, because if executives aren't setting and holding people accountable for strategy, then no one is.
Absolutely. So in your book, you describe the many ways that organizations can derail strategy once they move to implementation. Why does this happen, and what are key ways that organizations can bridge strategy formulation and implementation?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a great couple of questions. And the answer is the same, and that is accountability. And what I stress with Sentient Strategy and in the book and in the implementation itself is that you can't leave the strategic formulation process. Because let's face it, no strategy fails in formulation, they fail in implementation. So you can't leave the process without clear accountabilities about who is going to do what and produce what and implement what, overseen by the team and overseen by the CEO or the business owner. And so consequently, we encourage and enforce strategic implementation at the highest levels, highest quality, because people walk out accountable for achieving this bridge, involving others in the organization, sometimes involving investors, involving clients, customers. But what happens normally is that after you walk out of the strategic session exhausted, that's it. Nobody does anything.
Indeed, that is so common, and I know from sitting in both public and private sessions of that kind. It's sort of that time dump and that time drain that takes place. But again, what do you have to show for it? And I know that's exactly the point that you talk about in your book, which we're going to share with our listeners again in just a moment. So, I mean, Alan, I have to zoom out for just a quick moment before we head to break. What in your time, what is the sort of point in history that you can point to either in your lifetime or just from analyzing history that is most similar to what we've experienced over these past 3 years?
Well, most recently, go back to the financial crisis, early in the 2000s. Before that, there have been recessions. Before that, there have been technological breakthroughs. I mean, don't forget, nobody predicted the internet. We're really lousy at looking to the future if you basically boil it away. No one predicted the internet. And so consequently, there's going to be more things. This happened to be a microbe. There'll be more things. I'm waiting for them to dig down in Antarctic ice and find a true alien artifact somewhere from outer space. We'll see what happens then.
Ain't that true? Again, I've been chatting with Dr. Alan Weiss, consultant, speaker, and author through his consulting firm, Summit Consulting Group. He's worked with over 500 leading organizations, and we are privileged to pick his brain here in this conversation, talking about steering away from that term, return to normal and new normal, but talking a little bit more about that strategy, but the right kind of strategy. And we're going to continue that conversation in just a moment when we return on the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Chicago, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. And if you're listening around the world, of course, you can download our podcast on my website, syklein.com. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. And we're back on the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Get on my website, syklein.com, chatting with Dr. Alan Weiss, consultant, speaker, and author. We've been talking about strategic planning being an oxymoron, talking about how it's not a new normal, and actually providing some interesting analysis from prior sort of disruptions, if you will. So in your new book, Alan, you described the many ways that organizations can derail that strategy. And we've been talking a little bit about that, but you also talk about a success trap and how to stay away from falling into it. Can you tell us a little bit more?
I can. A lot of organizations become successful and they reach a plateau and they stop innovating and they stop taking risks and they pat themselves on the back and they pedal along this plateau. Now, the problem is all plateaus will eventually erode because of the laws of entropy. The key to success is to continue to grow, and the key to growth is to continue to innovate. And in Sentient Strategy, I stress the need for innovation. The only way I've ever seen to coast is downhill. No one coasts uphill. So the success trap is being on a plateau and thinking you're growing.
Absolutely. That's a great perspective. And I know you talk all about it in your book, but also on your website, alanweiss.com, which we'll send listeners to in just a moment. But Alan, you have a different take on what many call the Great Resignation, or this recent trend, maybe it's not so recent, of workers leaving their jobs. I'm really curious to talk about that because that's something that comes up, honestly, every single week in the comments section in our show. So what do you see as what's going on right now? And again, what's your perspective on that, on employment and the employment numbers?
Well, keep in mind that people don't leave organizations, they leave bosses. And in most organizations with which I've worked, you can find 2 or 3 people who people are leaving, and those are the people who should get to leave. The Great Resignation I've termed as an existential jailbreak. People leave organizations not because they need more money necessarily, but because they're not able to use their talents and be recognized for it. If you look at the literature for the last 20 years, people are motivated intrinsically, not by walking over hot coals or somebody giving them a rah-rah talk. They're motivated because they can use their talents and be recognized for the application of those talents. The Great Resignation also is an opportunity to cleanse a business. Don't just replace a body with a body. If somebody leaves, think about, who do I need for my future business and growth, staying out of the success trap? We also hear quietly quitting. I'm suggesting quietly firing. Somebody comes in and says, "Where's my desk?" You say, "It's over there in the freight elevator, hit the down button."
Absolutely, absolutely. Alan, this is really, really interesting. So you've been involved in many books. And again, you're talking about sentient strategy, how to create market dominating strategies in turbulent economies. And I'm really curious, what is the one takeaway? If we can leave our listeners with a homework assignment for the week ahead and they take out one thing from our conversation, what would it be?
Well, I would suggest that there's sentient strategy is based on this axis. On the one hand, there's an appreciation of the impact of your actions on people, on customers, on investors, on employees, and so forth. And on the other, there's an acute awareness of the environment in which you're operating. And I think these days of social justice and diversity, especially, and global economies, it's important to understand both those facts, that your actions have to be appreciated. You have to know what the result of your decision making is, but you also have to understand the environment in which you operate, because the demographics, the technologies, the social mores, the economies are changing constantly, and hence no normal.
Absolutely. No normal indeed. Dr. Alan Weiss, really enjoyed our conversation. I want to make sure our listeners can get in touch with you and pick up a copy of the book, Sentient Strategies, How to Create Market Dominating Strategies in Turbulent Economies. Where can we get in touch and where can we find the book?
Well, it's on all the major sites like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and so forth. You can also find all kinds of free resources on alanweiss.com, ALANWEISS.com, video, audio, text, and plus you can also order the book if you so desire.
Fantastic. We'll link in the show notes as well. Alan Weiss, thank you so much. Again, alanweiss.com, ALANWEISS.com. Thank you so much for joining us. That's a wrap for us here on the show, all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Some really interesting conversations. And of course, we'll link to all of our guests, all of their great books and websites through our show notes. We'll be back next Sunday right here on AM 560, The Answer in Chicago, and wherever podcasts may be found. To success, let's get down to business.